All right, good evening / morning, depending on where you are, everyone. I'm Ariel Cates. I'm the Director of Programming at Village Preservation, and I'm just so glad that you are all here with us. Just a little bit about Village Preservation. We have been documenting, celebrating, and fighting for the preservation of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo since 1980. We work to expand and extend landmark and zoning protections and stop inappropriate development, while also encouraging appropriate development in our neighborhoods. We conduct roughly 75 programs a year, all of which are now virtual, and most of which are free and open to the public. Our events are meant to illuminate the cultural and architectural heritage, history, and depth, and the value of preservation in our communities. We're a nonprofit membership-based organization, so your involvement and support mean the world to us. And you can learn more at our new website, villagepreservation.org. And a special shout out to our partner for this event, the Jefferson Market Library. Hi, Frank, glad that you're here. So just a little bit of Zoom protocol. I'm going to be here the whole time, but I will be invisible. If you want to chat me, I will be here. If you have thoughts, if there are technical issues, anything like that, please feel free. But if you have questions for our speakers, we're going to do a Q&A at the end of the talk. So please use the Q&A function for that. If you can, that's great. So without further ado, I am very pleased to turn this over to all of our speakers. Thanks, everybody. And I'm gonna put pictures up now. Yes, is that good?
Okay.
Okay.
We should say that we can see each other on the panel and Ariel, but we can't see you. All we can see are your comments. And Paula Grant already made a funny joke by saying that she feels like she's yelling up to us to the House of D.
I hear.
And we're yelling down. I'm going to jump into it. I'm Polly Thistlethwaite. I'm a librarian. I'm the Dean of Libraries at City University of New York now, interim dean. And but last summer I was asked by the Gotham Center, this history center at the CUNY Graduate Center, to write something about Stonewall for the 50th anniversary. And I thought, well, I'm going to just address the perennial question, where were the lesbians in the Stonewall riots? We hear this question a lot. And whenever Stonewall rolls around, I remember walking in Greenwich Village when I first came to the city, late 80s, with Joan, and I believe Paula, and some others from the Lesbian Herstory Archives. We were on our way to the Jefferson Market Library to give a slideshow of the Lesbian Herstory Archives. And on the way, Joan stopped me to say, look at this space. He's like, do you know what this space was? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I know what this space was, Joan. It was a courthouse before it was a groovy library with a budding gay and lesbian collection. And she said, no, Polly, that's not all. Here in this space, in this garden, was the Women's House of Detention, which was a jail where lovers would call to each other from the windows on the streets. In this public space, it was such a scene. The neighbors didn't like it at all, but it marked the village as queer space. And Joan and Paula and Deb and others from the archives would point to this space as like a monument space. It was like a monument, an honor to stop and note the resistance and the persistence of the queer women, particularly as they endured the horrors of confinement there. Butches, the majority population of Black and brown lesbians caught in the bar raids in the 50s and 60s. So in addition to that oral introduction, or the person-to-person introduction, I read a little bit, and Audre Lorde's autobiography, the 1982 Zombie, A New Spelling of My Name, Lorde writes about the House of Detention as well. And she writes, information and endearments flew up and down, the conversants apparently oblivious to the ears of the passers-by as they discussed the availability of lawyers, the length of stay, family, conditions, and the undying quality of true love. Women's House of Detention, right smack in the middle of the village, always felt like a one-up for our side, a defiant pocket of female resistance, ever present as a reminder of possibility as well as punishment. That's Lorde. And then from the enemy lit section in the Lesbian Herstory Archives, we always kept a collection of not just like lesbian celebratory or central lit, but the work used to describe and to oppress and to, we called it shorthand enemy lit. And there was the book Hellhole in that section by Sarah Harris. It was published in 1967. It was the shocking story of the inmates and life in the New York City House of Detention for Women. And it confirms what Lorde and the archivettes would tell me, but with a decidedly different bent. In Hellhole, page 40, Harris describes Mrs. Mary Landis, a long-term resident of West 9th Street, said, "It was terrible, the screaming and yelling that went on through the windows of that place. And not only could you hear them scream at each other in the most profane way, they'd also scream profanities down at people walking in the streets. And they'd throw things out of the window, lighted matches, for instance." So the House of Detention hardened us as outlaws, inside and outside. The orators in the windows of the House of Detention, both those imprisoned and those exposed outside, were the original queer docents of the Greenwich Village, the people who explained the village to the passersby. And lesbian visibility was born in this public space of resistance to confinement. David Carter, in his 2005 book, Stonewall, The Riots That Sparked the Gay Revolution, notes that Chris Babbitt, one of his, the people who he interviewed for the work, he said that the whole week of the Stonewall riots, the women were screaming, cheering us on. The whole jail, it seemed like, was alive with people, with activity, because the streets were alive with activity. Everything vibrated. And Doric Wilson told Carter that the Saturday night of the riots, red sparks were falling from on high through the night air as in a gentle rainfall. The prisoners were setting toilet paper on fire and dropping it from their cell windows to show their support for the rioters. So here in the House of Detention was the place where lesbians were during the Stonewall riots. We might not have been in the streets in the number that our gay and trans comrades were, but there were hundreds of dykes in the House of Detention during the riots. We were arrested, they were in jail, but they were not silent or hidden or still. They were the nerve center of the riots, the engine spiriting resistance, shouting from the windows, raining fire onto the streets, floating sparks up into the sky. And I hope that we can hear more from Jay, who was intimately familiar with the House of D, Joan as well, and also from Hugh Ryan, who's looking at the history of the House of Detention in this profound way. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Polly.
Yeah, thank you, Polly. My name is Hugh Ryan. I'm a historian and an author working, as Polly said, on a book now about the Women's House of Detention. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But first, I just want to say, for those of you who don't know what a panel of luminaries is here tonight, I am privileged and find that much of my work on the House of Detention and generally as a queer historian comes from having read Joan Nestle in college and beyond, from having visited the Lesbian Herstory Archives, which she co-founded, by having used the oral histories that she produced, without which we would not have so much history that we depend on, that I as a historian depend on. I would not be doing this work if Jay had not led me on a tour of the West Village to tell me about the history of these places. And if Jay hadn't actually been doing all the work that they do beyond that for economic queer justice.
Yes.
And as a curator, Polly's work at NYU is so often something that I depend on. If you talk to the archivists at the Fales Library today, they will tell you the only reason they have the robust queer collections that they have is because Polly started collecting them before anyone else was doing it. So I want to just say that tonight is an incredible group, and we are all, and I count myself among that, honored to be part of this conversation and to get to listen to it. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who is here as well. My work on the House of Detention has really been to try and figure out and to explore why this space has been completely ignored when it seems so central in so many ways to our history. I'm just going to put a few data points out there right now, and we can talk later about anything that people are interested in. The house opened in 1932, it closed in 1971, and it was raised in 1974. Today, 42% of women in prison identify as somewhere on the LGBT spectrum. 42% actively identify. Can you imagine what numbers we are talking about when these people could have been arrested for the sex they were having, for sending the word lesbian through the mail, for wearing a suit on the street, for running away from abusive parents? And those are all real cases that I have found, right? So queer prisons are a definite part of queer history, and one that has been ignored for far too long. And this prison in particularly is incredibly important because of where it was situated, in Greenwich Village, where it is part of a much longer carceral history of Greenwich Village that we do not talk about. The first prison in Greenwich Village opened in 1796, and there has been a prison there continuously ever since. 1796, and we never talk about it. Prisons, and particularly imprisoned women, many of them butch, many of them queer, many of them women of color or transmasculine people of color, played a part in making Greenwich Village a destination for theater in the 19-teens that we never talk about. They played a huge part in the pioneering of fingerprinting and other police technologies, invasive police technologies. They were used to study sulfa drugs, to cure venereal disease. All of these things that we do not think about when we think about that tiny little garden with its tiny little plaque that is the only memorial left of the House of D, all come through the people who were held here, because they were held here during the most homophobic time in American history, when New York City and the American government could shut down a bar, they could raid a private house, and they could sweep the streets, but they kept putting the women here in the House of Detention, and they could not get rid of them. And so this landmark is unique and unlike any other in New York history, and yet it does not get the attention that it deserves. The first lesbian love song on Broadway is set in the Women's House of Detention between two women of color, and it never gets mentioned when we talk about the history of Broadway. There's so much else that we could talk about, but I just wanted to throw all of that out there because I think sometimes we don't think about how the ways in which the people whose names we do not remember can still create and change the space that we live in today. That this history doesn't just matter because it is the history of people who are forgotten, which alone would make it important and worth remembering, but it matters also because it has changed all of our lives. And that has been denied to us when we do not know this history. So that's my little 2-minute spiel, and I'm gonna pass it on to Joan.
Okay. I'm just going to start. This is, okay. Acknowledgement of country. This is something I have learned in my 20 years here in Australia. So I must begin all public talk this way. Acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge that I speak to you from the traditional country of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and pay respect to elders past and present. I acknowledge that for 61 years on another continent, I walked the traditional country of the Lenape people, and I wish to pay my respect to the elders past and present. I acknowledge the sovereignty of both these countries has never been ceded. These primary brutal dispossessions are at the heart of the brokenness of our human solidarities. And we were told we should introduce ourselves. I said, who am I? Born in the Bronx over 80 years ago, in 1958, I made my way to the streets of Greenwich Village to find other obscenities, because that's what I was called and what at sometimes I felt. And it raised the issue, can obscenity be an identity? Can obscenity be a gender? To find other obscenities like myself. I did, and the rest is my life. And then from Hellhole that I read in preparation for this reread, it says, from the 1967 inner book flap for Hellhole, New York City's notorious house of detention for women, all the evils permitted there, overcrowding, filth, bad food, lack of medical care, lesbianism. I want to thank Ariel and all who have made this commemoration, this reflection on a disappeared lesbian queer historical site possible. I have waited over 6 decades for such a time. And that's why when I got this invitation, and it meant a long night and early morning here, I felt so lucky to have lived long enough to be part of this. Preparing for my participation was a journey through layers of private and national self, through layers of language that diminished and yet bonded. The image of the fortress-like building that was the Women's House of D has stayed with me all these many years. First in the late 1950s and throughout the 60s when I was a young femme, making my way at night from my railroad apartment on 9th Street between Avenue A and Tompkins Square, walking across town on 8th Street, my destination the Sea Colony, a rough butch femme bar across from Abingdon Square. East to west my route went, and always past the dark medieval building that housed so many poor and working women of color, so many lesbians. How to account for what stands solid through the years and changes of geographies, for what will become a basic structure of one's historical memory. The hot summer weekend nights that I stood and watched and listened to the pleas of lovers. Now, when I was writing this, I was listening to CNN from my dear old country, and I was hearing the news from Kenosha. And I realized the Black Lives Matter movement has its roots in this history as well. So much of what's happening in America has its roots in some of the things that surround the Women's House of Detention. I'm sorry, I had to write because I just wanted to make my presentation easier. I remember Black and brown butch women shouting up to the narrow slitted windows, to hands waving handkerchiefs far above the street, to bodiless voices of love, of despair, of determined connection. Mommy, the kids are okay, in Spanish and English. These voices mocked me then and still do. Here my sense of New York lesbian history began, and as Paley said, not a closeted one, but right there on the streets. Tourists taking in the village stopped and wondered at the spectacle of public women lovers in the midst of negotiating a hard patch in their lives. But neither stares or rude laughter interrupted this ritual of necessary and naked communication. I stood those days, convinced I was a criminal too, on my way to my haven, a police place where deviants were kept under a watchful eye, but given a small patch of freedom. From one urban street to another, my city was alive with freaks. In the bar, with that subversive sense of humor that undercuts hardship, the Women's House of D was called the Country Club. And friends were always asking after someone's woman who was incarcerated. The prison was a presence in our lives, a warning, a beacon, a reminder, and a moment of community. And then I just would like to end with a segment from a poem I wrote commemorating these times, from Stone Butch, Drag Butch, Baby Butch. and I wrote it in 1982. Stone Butch, Drag Butch, Baby Butch. Sandy tells me of the time she walked in Prospect Park with her lover on her arm. Forgetting they were freaks, they let the bending trees caress their days. The men, outraged by Sandy's pants and Carol's skirt, attacked with chains. The women fled past playgrounds, past the benches made for lovers. Sandy, smiling, says, through all the years they never hurt me, but we both knew better. A hot, dark night on A Street. Held tight with love, a butch yells up to a shadow on the wall, all she can see of her lady, who calls out, "I'm here, baby." And we all hear her. A shrine for separated lovers, the Women's House of D. They tore it down, replaced it with a garden. But those voices still are there, the lasting blossoms of our surviving time. Shame is the first betrayer. So, now, Jay?
Thank you, Joan.
I'm on. So thank you all, Polly, Hugh, Joan. I mean, it's great what you were saying. So I'm Jay Toole. I have a very short bio. I'm 72 years old, born in South Bronx, and was kicked out of the house when I was, can you hear me? My cable was going. Kicked out of the house in 62 when I was 13 and ended up in the West Village. I'm a co-founder of Queers for Economic Justice. I am a storyteller. I'm an activist for queerness, and I'm a butch. And I know if you want to know about me, read the bios. I'm all over the internet, but I'm sure we want to talk about the stories of the House of D and get to know more what was going on in there. I've spent time in that building, you know, and seeing the picture of it is bringing back a lot of memories, and Joan talking about those voices that are still in that little garden. You know, I do tours in the warm months, you know, and my tour always goes to that garden that used to be the Women's House of Detention. And I spend a lot of time there because I want people to understand what was there, the women that were there, the atrocities that happened to us there. And I hate that friggin' plaque out front that says nothing really. So anyway, that's who I am, you know. You can see the pictures there, you know, that sort of, you know, cold, dank, and very, it was a rough place, you know, and it was filled with butchers, it was queer, and, you know, I was arrested all the time, either for being homeless or not having the free locker because of female clothing on, or for whatever the reason was that the cop wanted to charge me with. I always ended up in the women's detention. I think my first time there was 14, and we'll talk about more of that later. Anyway, we should get on and talk about the House of D. Let's do it. I'm so excited for this.
Jay, when we were chatting before, you were saying how these photos that we're looking at made you cold.
I'm so sorry that you guys cannot hear me. I don't know what's going on now with the internet.
It sounds good now. It sounds good now. Jay, tell us a story.
Maybe that's the cord. Maybe that's what it is. I can't hear you guys.
We can hear you, Jay. It might help to turn off your video. That might make the sound better.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Lower the bandwidth, maybe? How's that?
Yeah, you know, the photos of the women, you know, at each end of a block, there was a radiator, you know, and okay, good. And it would be free in the wintertime. You would just, okay, a story. So, in the house of D, it was rampant with mice, and, you know, you buy cigarettes. Can you hear me now better?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, yes, Jay.
No. Is that any better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on, guys. I'm plugging my computer in. Maybe that'll help it. So then, can you hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Okay. So the house of D was rampant with mice, you know, and we'd go to commissary and buy our cigarettes and food and everything. And there was a, you know, they call them two-man cells, you know, bunk beds. And a very high shelf was across from the bed, the bunks. Oh, good. And we'd put our cigarettes up on the shelves. And every morning we'd wake up and we'd only have like a half a pack of cigarettes left because the mice love to smoke. They eat our cigarettes, and we couldn't keep them on us because then we'd have all the mice in bed with us. You know, the other thing about the house of D was that we all smoked cigarettes, and we all smoked filtered cigarettes. And the reason for that was it's not like in the movies where a guard pulls a handle, and all the cell doors close. That's not how it was there. A CO, a correction officer, would come down the block and close the cells manually, right? So we could get our filter cigarettes, break off the filters, put them in the jam lock, so that when she came, she'd slam the door, and it sounded like it locked. I mean, I'd never forget those sounds of those jail doors slamming. But then she'd go back into the main corridor, and when lights went out, we'd be able to open up our cells and scoot into whoever else we wanted to see for the night and everything. You know, it was a, you know, you didn't want to get caught though, because then it was isolation and all your commissary taken away, you know. But the yelling out the buildings was people all night long on 7th on Greenwich Avenue, right? People would be out there all night long screaming up to their loved ones. My people were yelling up to me. I'd be yelling down to them. You know, it was constant, you know, just to show the love that even though we were in prison, you know, we still felt that love from our community members that were yelling up to us, you know. I ran out of breath. So I've been in that place, I guess, starting around 14 or 15. I always lied about my age. And, you know, eventually they'd find out how old I really was and, you know, get a hold of the juvenile division to put me in a juvie hall or something like that. And then as I got older, I was arrested, I don't know how many times, over, I guess, about 20, and for all different reasons. You know, I'd be arrested for standing on the street corner, you know, and the cop didn't like the way I was standing there, you know, I'm too butch or too whatever, and they grab us and bring us, you know, right into the house of D and then into the courts. But yeah, the cops were brutal back then. Going into the house of D for the first time, you know, they bring you in through the basement, and it's the cold showers, freezing cold water or super hot water. There was not a happy medium there. You know, strip search, and then the cavity search was so brutal, so friggin' brutal. But that's not the bad parts. The bad parts were the physicals by the doctors that they had in there. The doctors that were in there were, and I don't know whether it was just to the butch women or it was to all women. I think it was to everybody, but I think the butchers got it more than their share of the brutality. And I always tell this story that the one time I went in and they got me up on the table for the physical examination, and he put his hand so far in me that the pain was terrible. You know, I couldn't move. I just couldn't move. And when he was done, he told me to get off the table, and I couldn't get off. You know, I was just paralyzed with pain. And when I did, there was nothing but blood, and he throws me a friggin' paper towel, you know. And again, you know, so many women had to go through the same ordeal as me. And it lives in me, you know, it stays in me. It's in my body, you know, it's in my soul. And when I tell those stories, when I go into that garden and I tell these stories, I want the folks that are with me to understand that many of us were in there for nothing, you know. It was, you know, bogus charges, you know. It was the homophobia, you know, how society felt about us at that time, you know, and still does a portion of them. Anyway, I got to catch my breath.
Jay, thanks for saying that. It takes a lot of courage. Like, even though you're a practiced storyteller, that is the most difficult story to tell. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
I was wondering, like, about the you know, the racial and ethnic composition of the prisoners, and the House of Detention had some annual reports, but in the 60s, late 60s, the report data wasn't in there.
I would say 7 to 3 people of color.
What's that?
I would say out of 10, 7%, at 10%, 7% were people of color. 7, 8%.
Hey, Hugh, you got some stats on that, didn't you?
Yeah, and I saw someone ask about how many people were held there generally. The prison was built to hold 400 people at a time. Within 1 year of opening, it was considered dangerously overcrowded. And in fact, of the about 39 years it existed, it was overcrowded for all but 9 of those years. And from the very beginning, it held way more women of color, particularly Black women, than would be proportional to New York City. But by the late 30s, early 40s, it was predominantly women of color, predominantly Black women. The statistics aren't kept very well, so there isn't a lot of nuance to them, unfortunately. And the only reason it was ever not overcrowded was immediately after World War II, when they developed better drugs for treating venereal diseases. Because up until that point, about 40 years before then, if you were a woman who was found to have gonorrhea or syphilis or suspected of having them, you would be imprisoned. Even if you hadn't been tried for anything, you would be taken to the jail and kept there until you were considered medically clean. So when the new sulfa drugs came in 1945, there was a brief moment where the prison was undercrowded, but that only lasted for a few years before they began filling it up, predominantly after that point, with people who were using narcotics.
And I just want to add another community, and it's essential, and it's another disappeared community, if I may say so. The amount of sex workers, of women sex workers, who are incarcerated at the Women's House of Detention. And I know this because in the Sea Colony is where their lovers came and where they came when they were let out. And I like to make this a little more complicated because the reason, so we can't ever forget that they were comrades. They were part of this. Many of the women were arrested for shoplifting, for the petty crimes that economically stressed people get involved in, like my mother. But, and why it was closed, and I don't know if we're going to, and this is contentious, but all of this, these terrible strip searches, the decaying building was going on until the white, if I may say so, more affluent and women were arrested because of their civil rights and peace demonstrations. And one of them was Andrea Dworkin. And when she was strip searched, all hell broke loose because her father was a very wealthy lawyer, and James Wexler takes this up. And it's then that Mayor Lindsay, and why? Because now it's a shame. The city is ashamed of this revelation, not because of the women, the Black and brown women who have been enduring this for so long, but because all of a sudden, and this is why another book, and I always do this, and you have to forgive me, but I'm a working class woman who survived because of books. I always read in preparation for my events, so I did read Hellhole, and this is a mixed bag. It isn't, it's a very interesting work, actually, and it was a journey for me back to the times when we were in obscenity. That's not so bad sometimes in an obscene time. But this book called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, brilliant if you know her work, and she talks about caste, how the powerful maintain their power. And this is all here. So when the Women's House of Detention was torn down, it was done as an act of, I would say, of the elite classes to rid themselves of the shameful public image of women calling out their love, of deviant women deviant racially, deviant sexually, calling out their love. And the bad thing, yes, this prison needed to be as it was, it was out of date from almost when it was built, but at least when it was in the village, and I don't know if you agree with this, Jay, but at least when it was in the village, we saw it every day. We could make contact, we could confront, we would have had and could have had political actions. But so what they did, and I use the word, they disappeared, and it disappeared from our history. They disappeared the building. They disappeared the history. They disappeared these women's lives, and they put it on Randall Island. And I'll ask you, how many of you have walked by a women's prison in your lifetime? And that's what they do now. They move the prisons far away, even so the families can get there. So I'm just saying, this is a complex history, and it's all about economics, and it's about caste, and it's about class. It's about sex workers always being seen as fit targets, sometimes by other women. So you see my passions run deep.
Yeah, Joan, everything you say, I just second. From the moment the prison opened, at least 50% of the women who were there were arrested on sex work related charges for every single year it was opened.
Like Mabel was, Mabel Hampton. Yeah.
And she, like many of the women, were arrested with absolutely no evidence, no anything. In 1916, New York City actually ruled that you did not need to have any exchange of money or services to be deemed a prostitute. Any lewd woman who was outside was considered an opening to prostitution and therefore could be arrested for prostitution. And in 1936, the city ruled that men could not be charged with prostitution. So this was all about finding those women who were economically disadvantaged, racially disadvantaged, sexually disadvantaged, genderedly disadvantaged, and silencing them and putting them away somewhere where no one else had to deal with them.
Oh, we had to wait so long Jay, to hear your voice and to see these images, to see those women in those cells. With all this miracle of communications, what willful disappearance can do.
The cells were very, very small. You try not to be standing up when your bunkmate was standing up at the same time. They were really, really small. There was a bunk bed, a toilet at the foot of the bed. Next to that was your sink, and then you had a very high shelf, and then the bars, you know. So they were very, very small. Yeah, they're showing a picture now, you know. Yeah, you couldn't walk. You couldn't walk, you know, and so, you know, during the daytime, they'd open up the cells, and, you know, everybody would come out of their block. Like I said, they had four cell blocks. Cell block A, B, C, and D, you know, and we'd come out and we'd sit in the corridors on the floor and play cards. Try to keep our minds off of whatever charges that they were hitting you with. And, you know, I was arrested once inside the precinct. My friend were in the precinct trying to find out about another friend. And they arrested us for prostitution, saying that when we got to court, it said that we were on 14th Street and 3rd Avenue, and we were arrested for prostitution. You know, the cops could do anything they wanted to back then. You know, they just, whatever they wanted, you know, they get you. You know, if they didn't like you, they didn't like the way you looked, you know, it was just so bad. The beatings were bad. You know, were there fights in the women's house a day? Yeah, there were fights. But there was this one CO, she was a sergeant, correctional officer on the floor, who was brutal. You know, and she was a butch, and she was brutal. And if you had a beef with somebody or you had an argument with somebody, she would take these two people, put them in the last cell on the block, right? The last cell, close the gate, and ordered them to fight. I mean, it was terrible. You could hear these women screaming and crying, and they had to beat the shit out of each other to satisfy this guard. You know, it was just bad. It was bad all the way around, man. It was fucked up. Sorry, I didn't mean to curse.
Jay, it's so powerful to hear your stories. And when Joan talks about willful disappearance of history, you're speaking and telling those tales is resisting that disappearance. We've had, you know, the House of Detention is not well documented. Jay knows this probably better than I do, but, you know, the statistics about, you know, who was in there and when are difficult to find. The reports are sort of like poorly, you know, they're poorly organized. I mean, all of the patterns of record keeping are disrupted around it. It was like deemed not important enough to record. And that's odd because it was a state controlling institution, yet it also worked to disappear itself in the erasure of its own record. But I mean, you know, it's so, look at all of this. The only reason we're talking about this is because you're speaking, because Lorde spoke, because Nestle tells this story. And these are not inherited, institutionalized voices. These are voices who have had the courage to tell truths when the truths don't, when the truth is not welcome.
Could I just say something about how aging plays a role in this? And Jay, maybe this is true for you too. when you've been lucky enough to live a long time and to live it on the streets and to live it engaged in a kind of community activism. But like a sieve almost, the searing memories, the things that are that become part of your body are sorted out, all that 80 years of a multitude of experiences. And I can still hear those voices because I knew when I stood on that corner on my way to that other policed place, that this was a monumental truth of both human failure in terms of how we treat powerless people, but also of incredible persistence of connection, of refusal, of trying to eke out a life under the whiplash of elite power. And I'm just saying to everyone who's listening to me, live the most engaged life you can. Endanger yourself in good trouble. And because when you get to be 80, right, Jay, or you're sitting in your room, wherever you are, it's that's your sinew, it's that sits with you, that you walk through those doors and you refuse their silences. And part of probably what you're talking about is shame. Power is ashamed of those who make it uncomfortable, of those who, and I may be talking too long, but this is something else that happens to me.
Go on.
When they're shamed, and these women made them ashamed. These women were applied on real estate. And if you want to put it the most basic way, Lindsay, the great Lindsay, he wanted to get rid of that scene because tourists were complaining. That's not why they came to Greenwich Village, to see black and brown women yelling up to lovers and seeing. That's not why they came. So I just say, and I'll stop, but this is a plea, because so much is happening now that needs your voices. And when you do, and when you engage, and when you look beyond your own life, but to the lives of others who are struggling with powerlessness, those moments will get you through your own end of life, will get you through with the knowledge that a connection was made. That was what all of 80 years could be about.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Jay. I don't
just
know, where's
wanna-
Ariel? Oh, Hugh, come on.
Oh, I was just gonna add, sorry, it was, that was very emotional, Joan, thank you. I just wanted to say, connecting it to this moment as well, in the final year that the prison was open, 1969 to 1970, it was the site of so many mass mobilizations by queer people, by Black Panthers, by the Young Lords, by the Radical Lesbians, by a number of different women's organizations, by the Weather Underground. We don't remember those events because we often only think or are only told about Stonewall, which of course matters so much. But there was the Haven riot that happened outside the Women's House of Detention in 1970, the International Women's Day riot outside of the House of Detention in 1970, a week of 24/7 protests at the end of 1969, organized between the Gay Liberation Front and the Black Panther Party. It was a constant presence. They never let up. And that is a big part of why the prison closed. And you may only have heard about Stonewall, but all of those other actions are what made the prison such a thorn in the side of the city that they could not let it stand. And now, I don't like what they did afterwards, but it was that mass mobilization, that intersectional mobilization. Afeni Shakur, who was in the prison after having been accused of being one of the bombers in the Panther 21, which is a total fake conspiracy made up to attack the Black Panther Party. She was pregnant with Tupac. She defended herself from the prison. She was there during Stonewall. And a year later, she went to the Revolutionary People's Convention that the Black Panthers convened in Philadelphia and attended the Gay Liberation Front workshop, where she told them seeing the gay liberation banners outside of the prison during the protests made her start thinking about the connections between the Black Panther Party and gay liberation and women's liberation. And not only did she attend their workshop and work with them on their demands, she actually called the Gay Liberation Front to come to an apartment where Huey P. Newton was giving a speech about the future of the Black Panther Party, because she wanted them to meet with him and talk about their intersectional future. That apartment was Jane Fonda's apartment. And so all of these folks had this incredible meeting of the minds in mid-1970 in Jane Fonda's apartment to talk about a revolutionary future that brought all of these things together. And it's because of the House of Detention. And of course, you know, COINTELPRO and the government's attack on the Black Panther Party largely kept a lot of that from happening. But what we are seeing today in the streets, the Black Lives Matter movement, is directly connected to what was happening outside of this prison. And I think those connections get completely forgotten and erased when we are not told that there wasn't just Stonewall, right? So many other people were fighting and continue to fight, like Jay and Joan, to this day. So for every one of you who attended a protest in the last couple of months, thank you. Your work may not feel in the moment like it has made a change, but let me tell you, 50 years from now, people are going to look back on this moment.
That's right. It's the erasure of the intersectionality.
Yeah.
It's the erasure of the...
I got one more story. Can I tell one more story?
Yes.
Please do.
So I was there when the Weathermen blew up the building, that building, right? And the whole prison shook. But I was also there when they brought in Angela Davis that night.
Yeah.
And the streets were absolutely crazy. Not just Greenwich Avenue. I mean, all around the building, people were yelling and chanting. And, you know, most of us didn't know who the hell she was, you know. And they're yelling up, "Free Angela, free Angela, free Angela." And back then I was the baby butch, and they called me Junior, right? And I'm yelling out the window, "Free Junior, who the fuck is Angela?" Years later, I met Angela, and I told her that story, you know. You know, but yeah, you know, so many things happened around the House of D, you know, and people don't know it. You know, people don't know the stories, you know, and all the women that died there, you know, before methadone, you know, women, and I was a drug addict. I was a heroin addict. Trying to kick heroin in the Women's House of D was no joke, you know. There was no medications, and they wouldn't give you anything anyway. You know, they threw you in a cell with just a blanket, and that was it. No clothes. That was it. You know, it was just bad. Anyway, that's my story.
So what do you think? We need a bigger plaque on that House of D space. We need a monument to this struggle.
That's right. We don't need a plaque. We need a monument. You know, they're going to put up a monument across from the House of D of Sylvia and Marsha, right? Marsha P. Johnson, from what I understand. We need a monument depicting women that were in this nightmare of a building, you know, that died there, that were incarcerated for illegal charges that were put against them, you know, that so many of us were innocent of the charges that we were convicted of. You know, there has to be something there besides that little bitty plaque that says this was a women's prison. Fuck that shit, man. It's like,
no.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, revision. We need a monster monument.
Sorry, I get excited and curse, guys. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
No, it's great.
So how are we going to do this monument? Who's going to start it? Who do we get a hold of?
Well, I think there are some people here from the LGBT landmarks, historical landmarks group. Yeah, Ken Lesbader's here somewhere, so hopefully they're already working on it.
There has to be something there. Women died there, Ed.
And you know, the irony, or the, I don't know the irony, but to replace it with a garden, to replace it with a picturesque, domestic scene of urban, you know, country life. And we love gardens and we lusted them when one lived in the city. But still, there's something really cynical about that.
It's the triumph of gentrification there.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It was a garden, but of different things.
Yes.
It was yeah. Woo.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I
Hi.
thought maybe I would.
And you finally came back, huh?
Mhm.
Yes.
Dinner.
I thought I would come in to start asking some of the questions that we've been getting. Does this feel like an okay time for that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So speaking of Ken Lustbader, hi Ken. Ken wanted to know, was this the only prison to exclusively incarcerate women in New York City at that time? Were there others?
There was a Brooklyn women's house of detention. Eventually, I think in the early 40s, maybe even late 30s, those women were all moved over to the Manhattan women's house of detention. Before the house of detention opened, there was the Greenwich Farm colony, which was outside the city. It too was closed in 1936 to move all of the women to New York. Earlier, I see Sarah Schulman was asking about this. Earlier, before the House of D opened in 32, there was a prison or a detention center of some kind on that exact spot since 1844 to 1972. Throughout the 20s, it was occasionally used for women only, but not regularly. So it was also the home of the Women's Court, however, so there's a lot of confusion in the documents. Mae West was held there during a period where it was briefly a women's only prison, I think in 1925 for her play that had homosexuality on Broadway, but it kind of went back and forth.
Where did everybody go when they closed the place down?
In 72, Rikers. And as Joan was saying, not only did the prisoners not want to go there, the imprisoned women and transmasculine people, the guards protested it. They said, this is wrong. It is terrible for us, and it is terrible for the families of the inmates. It causes more social harm.
Mm. And just to say, parallel to this is Bedford Hills, outside of the city limits, where Miss Hampton was incarcerated and so many others. So that's a whole other history running parallel.
Correct. Yeah, Bedford, Westville. Yeah.
Oh wow! And Michael Levine, hi Michael, has told us that the community had wanted to convert it to low-income housing, and apparently the city said no.
Right.
It almost ended up becoming a nursing home. That was the big one that almost went through before the local community really protested. In fact, they were in favor of raising it, even though there were a lot of community members who thought we might be able to use this for something we want, you know, kind of a gentrified purpose. But they were like, it is better to tear it to the ground because that way we can make sure the city will never build a prison here again, rather than use it for something useful.
Mm. City wouldn't build a prison anyway because it doesn't bring in enough money. I mean, real estate wise now, given Manhattan. But
absolutely.
Someone asked, is it true that Ethel Rosenberg was imprisoned there?
Isn't it?
Yes.
Amazing.
She was known for singing beautiful songs to any of the women who were sick. She would sing lullabies.
Oh.
Oh, not just her. Every night in the house.
Really, Jay? What kind of songs would they sing?
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Hey, turn your video off again, Jay. We lost you.
I can. Oh, there we go.
Hey, Jay, what kind of songs did they sing?
Usually blues, some religious, but jazz, but amazing, just amazing, you know. And it was usually right after they'd come around with your marmalade sandwiches at night. I hate marmalade to this day. So, especially when the lights went out, people start singing.
Someone asked, what were the matrons like and were they lesbians?
Most of them were pieces of shit. Just pieces of shit, you know. You got, you know, once in a while you get a good one on tour, you know, and she'd be all right with you. But on the whole, they didn't care what you did, you know, if they could hit you with something, you know, or put you in a confined cell on lockdown, take away your commissary for no reason. You know, it was that power shift, man, that they had, you know, that thought they had over us, you know. Yeah, most of them were crap, man, you know. Yeah, I don't really have good memories of the COs in there.
That's another homophobic element of history, is to put the lesbian in the power position of the matron, and to.
Yeah, a lot of them were. A lot of them were queer, you know. And you'd think that we'd get a better deal with them, but we didn't. You know, it was that power shift. The same thing in the shelter system, and you know, in other institutions. It's the power.
Oh my gosh, we have so many questions. Yes, Valerie Solanas also.
Oh, my friend Valerie, yes, yes.
What was she like, Jay?
She was a character. Let me put it that way. She was a character. There used to be furnished rooms on Waverly Place and on the block after that. What is that? 7th Street. I can't think of it. But she'd come pounding on our doors, you know, wanting to come in to read her manifesto, you know, and she'd be just pounding on the doors, and it's like, Valerie, go away. We're trying to get high. We don't want to hear it, you know, because she's gone forever and ever. But she's also another part that was broken by the system, you know. Yeah, she got I think she got a raw deal on everything, you know. She didn't get the help. Anyway, another one lost, you know. But yeah, she was a character. She was lovable, but I could only take her for a little bit of time. She was constant mouth, constant.
It's incredible. I'm so grateful for this. We have another anonymous question asking, how long were people typically incarcerated for when they were there?
I think the longest I did there was close to 24 months. You know, you stayed, after you went to court, you know, they'd send you there, and before sentencing, and you'd be there for months and months and months and months before you even got sentenced, you know, and that's not even talking about what the tombs were like, you know. I know it's bad for men, but for the women also, the tombs were atrocious. I mean, that was the pits of the fucking pits, man, the tombs. And they're still open. I can't believe it. I forgot what the question was.
How long?
It could be a week, You know, you could get bailed out, and you know, you could make bail or somebody bail you out. You can get out that night, that morning. You know, but typical, I would say, a month to maybe a little over a year. You know, was typical.
In the early part of the 20th century, they started pioneering these things called indefinite sentences on arrested women, where basically what it meant was that you would be held for as long as the detention center felt it was necessary in order to make you the proper kind of woman. These sentences were not used on men in the same way. And so you get all of these sentences that are, you know, arrested for maybe hitchhiking. You'll see that a lot, and they'll spend 18 months in the prison because it was felt that they were not yet ready to be out on the outside. And this is one of those areas where in the early, sort of like the 30s period, a lot of what were called social feminists of the day, kind of the white feminists who were really about promoting women in business, got on board with this. And they really felt that prisons should keep low-income women until they were trained to be either maids or wives. And that was it.
That's why Jay never got out. It's a long ass time to be in jail.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is a long time to be in there.
This is the whole incarceration by one way or the other of of women who refuse to be domesticated.
Mm.
And that's why, and now this is why this whole marriage, this whole thing of rushing to be someone's wife, I see so many reverberations. Just one other thing. Don't you find it interesting that in popular culture now, like Orange is the New Black, and before that, that the trope of the women's prison is a site of entertainment, of racial conversation. And that's another time. But what does this mean? You know, that the real history gets disappeared. Mm-hmm. And then you have, but yet, so there is this recreation for the public imagination. It's just something that just came to me.
That's just what it is, Joan. Imagination. I've never been in a jail like that. And I've been in many jails throughout the country.
Yeah. One of the most horrifying things, I think, to me that I've sort of found in doing this research is that at the very beginning, when the Women's Court was opened, so 1907, 1908, 1909, the origins of the Women's House of Detention in the same spot, they explicitly opened these trials to the public as a source of entertainment so that they could watch women who were accused of prostitution being dragged through hell as a corrective measure. This is a quote from the New York Tribune in 1918. Chinatown or the Night Court, which shall it be, has been a usual after-dinner conversation on the part of aristocratic slummers or diners in uptown restaurants or Greenwich Village. Motors have stood for hours outside of the Jefferson Market Courthouse while the occupants in evening dress have watched the tragic procession of women, in turn defiant, sullen, whimpering, pass before the magistrate for sentence. Gray-haired women with shifty eyes and bold-faced little girls of 16 stand before the judge while their offense is discussed in the presence of unsympathetic and sensation-seeking spectators. And not only that, after they were put through the trial, they were immediately pulled into a room that was just curtained off. So basically within view and within sound, where they were given their initial physical examinations, which were, as Jay said, brutal. This was considered entertainment. And in fact, these kinds of entertainments predate Greenwich Village being an entertainment district by a decade. This is the first reason that uptown rich people came to Greenwich Village. Before cafe culture, before vaudeville culture, they came to watch women arrested for sex act be humiliated.
And this is a butch femme history. Many of the sex workers were the femme women, and their partners were butch women. This, just saying that this is a suffering and a courage of the butch femme world that gave me life. But that's not important that it gave me life. But this is why it was so painful when this community was so judged at the beginning of a new time, lesbian feminism. But so it takes, how long does it take for cultural thinking to catch up to the lived courage, to catch up to the lived complexities. And tonight we're doing it. We'd be 50 years to bring them all back to our concern, to our attention, to our hearts. I'm sorry, I get very dramatic. It's like, okay.
Thank you.
Not a thing to apologize for.
Right?
No.
Love you, Joan.
Love you, Jay.
Is it okay if I ask a few more questions? You're up for it? All right. We've got a couple of questions from folks about, like, did you get fresh air? Were there activities? Could you exercise?
Yes, we got fresh air. You know, the windows opened, you know, there were bars on them, of course, but, you know, you could open up the windows. That's how we yelled out there. But there was also a rooftop that each floor, each tier would go up one at a time, or maybe, you know, 1 block, 2 blocks at a time would go up to the roof, and you'd get up there for maybe an hour, you know. And the roof was all encased with barbed wire and everything, you know, and like we were going to jump off of it. But so we did get fresh air that way. Exercise, sex.
Counts? It counts?
You know, it happens. You know, you walk. We used to walk the corridor, right, and up and down. You know, so the length of the building that you showed in the beginning, we could walk not the Greenwich Avenue side, right, because you couldn't get into the other cell blocks, but the side of it, right, like from Greenwich Avenue to 10th Avenue, right? You could walk and we'd walk up and down, up and down, up and down in circles past the CO's desk for exercise, you know. And especially if it was cold, you know, you want to be moving, you know, because it got really, really cold in there, man, and hot in the summer. You know, and for recreation, they had recreation. They had churches come in. They had the Catholic Church come in, which nobody went, and they had the Baptist or Methodist come in, one of them, where everybody went because it was a way for us to fly kites. And I don't know if you know what flying a kite is in prison terms. So it's for the people that don't know, it's you write a little note, right? And you pass it off to somebody, and you're on the 4th floor, and you want it to get to the 10th floor. So you just tell the person, I want this to get to so-and-so on 10, blah, 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 blah. And we call them kites. So that's why we went to that church, because we could mingle and be able to pass kites around and get messages through the building.
Was there like visitation? Was that a thing?
Oh yeah, there was a visitor's room when you walked the main end. They brought us in the paddy wagons on the 10th Street, 8th Street, 8th Street, 9th Street side. They pulled the paddy wagon in, and we go down into the basement, shackled. But the visitors came in on the Greenwich Avenue side. I think it was like 5 steps that they go up and they go in, and there was a huge visiting hall there where you talk on the telephone to someone, you know, whoever came to visit Jack. You know, I never got any visitors because, you know, it had to be family, you know. It's like, I didn't have any, but people did get visitors. There was a visiting room, and there was a donation room. Like after you got your shower and everything, when they first brought you in, they give you a donation room and you hope that you knew somebody in the donation room, so that if you were butch, you know, you could get some kind of masculine clothing, maybe culottes and a t-shirt, you know, but mostly skirts and blouses and things like that. And they had a priest come in, and he ran the Haven that was across the street from the House of D. And I can't think of his name, Father somebody, blah, blah, blah. And he'd come out and he'd wait for the girls to get out, or he'd come and visit. And if you wanted to try to straighten out your life, you know, he'd meet you at the front door and bring you across the street to this place called the Haven, where he tried to introduce you in society as a good woman. And but from what I understood, I met him a few times, and you know, he seemed like an all right guy. He didn't try to make religion a big thing. He brought us books. Can't think of his name.
Can you talk a little bit more about books? Were people reading and writing? Lisa, hi Lisa, just mentioned creative writing classes.
I don't remember any creating writing classes. You know, I guess you would call me a player. I didn't really go to the reading and writing classes. You know, I wanted to have commissary, so I, you know, mostly stayed with the girls so I could have commissary. But so I don't know if there was reading and writing classes. I'm sure there was. Books, there were books. People were reading. You know, I read a few books. You know, I don't know what the names were or anything, but yeah, people were reading, and I imagine people were writing. You know,
The library in the House of D.
Mail went out. Yeah, of course people were writing. Mail went out. Mail came in.
The library in the House of D has a funny little history. It was started by Mae West, who donated $1,000 to start a library for imprisoned women after she was incarcerated at the prison before the House of D. And it sort of existed in many forms after that. But unfortunately, with the prison, you know, one, they didn't care very much, and two, it opened during the Great Depression. So all of the funding for anything like educational activities and vocational activities was through the Works Project Administration during the Depression. So that lasted for a little while. It wasn't very much funding to begin with, but even that was then cut off by the late 30s. So for most of the time, there were really almost no activities. What was done was brought in by volunteers, largely post-1955 when Anna Cross came in. They tried to do some vocational stuff. It just didn't really work out ever. There was absolutely like no real vocational training. And the commissary that Jay was talking about, that, you know, the funds where you could buy cigarettes or you could buy candies, that is the only money that was used to fund psychological services.
Right.
In the first 20 years the prison was opened. It was that, and it was money from outside groups. So there was like almost really no services being provided.
They had a beauty parlor, barbershop, and I can remember the hair burning. You know, I can smell it. Oh my God. You know, and that if somebody didn't like you and they were doing your hair, doing shit. You know, the same thing with the cafeteria. You know, at the mess hall, when, you know, they bring down each floor one at a time. And the only thing about Orange is the New Black, Joan, that was true, is that you never, ever want to get a kitchen staff worker mad at you. Because you didn't know what you were going to get in your food, because they were all prisoners, you know. So, you know, but the food was terrible. I mean, it was, you know, you had to be starving. I mean, actually starving, really, you know, to eat. Hence marmalade sandwiches.
Yeah, the state reports actually frequently comment on there being mouse shit in the food. They didn't do anything about it, but they did note it in the reports.
Yeah, I didn't want to mention that. Yeah, how many mice stuff do I have in my system?
It's like every element of bodily existence was, it was pure torture. It was torture through and through. control and
It was control and controlled torture. I like that. Yes, it was. You know, they had their knee on your neck at all times, their thumb on your throat at all times. You know, but at times I gotta say that the queer community, the butchers and the femmes, we also called the House of D the Playhouse. You know, because when we went there, we knew everybody. It was like coming home, you know, and you knew everybody. So we did actually call it the Playhouse, you know.
Joan, Jay, I wanted to show you this. I was hoping you would mention that. This is an article, I don't know if it's showing up backwards. This is from 1959. It's an article called Love Without Men in Women's Prison. And it's a woman who was arrested, a school teacher in New York, who was arrested and told the true story about the House of D. And she says in there, sex between women and relationships between women were how people survived, but also how they discovered themselves, and that people should not be nervous about people having sex in prison. It's going to happen, and it's going to be a good thing for most of those women. You know, there was sexual violence, but, and what I love about this is, you know, she had to publish it in this tabloid magazine. The other headline, car exhaust caused lung cancer. The tabloids knew the truth.
I used to read that magazine as a kid.
And do you
It was a
remember
good one.
But yes, sex in the House of D, yeah, that was a no-brainer, you know, and it was a way for us to survive, you know, being in there. You know, butchers had their girls, whether they were femmes or gay for the stay. You know, a lot of women were just gay for the stay, you know, and that was fine also, you know. But yeah, a lot of women found their own identities in there, realized, you know, who they were. I don't remember any sexual assault, you know, fights, yes. Sexual assault, not when I was in there. I never heard of any. I'm sure maybe it's happened, but not when I was in there. Everybody was willing.
Mm.
Catherine wants to know if there was ever any privacy.
If you could get into the shower, right, and have a watchdog, right, like your bunkmate maybe is your buddy, right, or somebody in your cell block is a buddy of yours, and you want some privacy with your girl, you go into the shower and your buddy would be outside, right, and that you'd have privacy that way, you know. But any other privacy, you know, the blocks were open, you know, women were out in the corridors walking back and forth, going in and out of their own cells. The only place really was, you know, in the shower, or sometimes on the elevator.
Mm.
Did we lose Jay? Oh no, okay, you're here. Great. Hugh, we got a question about the Broadway show.
This is one of my favorite little tidbits. The House of D actually shows up in Broadway and off-Broadway shows starting in the 1950s. It's in quite a few of them, though, again, completely forgotten. I think as Joan and Jay were saying, sometimes we can acknowledge something as a joke or as an entertainment when we cannot acknowledge the truth of it. But by 1971, so the year the prison closes, Melvin Van Peebles had written an album in 1969 called Brer Soul, with a song on it called 10th and Greenwich, which he wrote because he had been living on the park bench outside of the Women's House of Detention. He'd seen the women calling up to one another. And when he turned it into a musical called Ain't Supposed to Die a Natural Death in 1971, he turned that song into a love song between two women in the House of Detention, one calling up to her lover above. The song is sadly completely forgotten today because the show was just trashed by racist white theater reviewers. Although the initial reviews were incredible, it was nominated for something like 8 different Tonys, including Best Actress for Beatrice Wind, who sang the love song 10th and Greenwich. It really is an incredible show. You cannot find it anywhere online, unfortunately, so I digitized a copy of the song, so we can either play that at some point, maybe at the end of all this when people are done with their questions, or I can send the link to folks if they want to. But what's amazing about it is not only is it an incredibly beautiful and sad and wonderful song, but that in their discussion back up and forth, at one point, the woman who's yelling up says, "Oh, hey, did you hear about Reese's boy? He turned 2. I bought the hats at his party." And so it's sharing this queer gossip between lovers about what's happening back in the neighborhood. So just as Joan and Jay and Polly were talking about, when the prison was in the city, these women were at least connected to the world that they had known before.
Yes, yes, yes.
Hugh, I need that link. You can send it to me.
Absolutely. Ariel, I don't know what the plan is for the rest of this, but if at any point you want to play it, I'm...
Were you going to play it, Ariel?
I'm glad to. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it.
We've still got almost 100 people here with us, so I feel like that's
Thank you all so much for being with us.
Yeah.
It's an honor to be with you, all on the panel and in the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Okay, so let's see.
This will be our outro music.
Elvin, Teresa's boy. Would you believe it? He turned 2. I gave out the hats at the party. I miss you. Baby, is you ever gonna come back and dance with me? Guess what? I'm getting on my feet. I did Big Rudy a favor. He's taking a shine to me. Gives me a few little things to do. The pigeon had an egg. I miss you. Baby, is you ever gonna come back and dance with me? Dorothy, you ain't never gonna face the man again. Count on me. Everything is gonna be cool for you. If he's still around, for your monkey too. I miss you. Baby, is you ever gonna come back and dance with me? Guess what? Washington Hall got new kind of lamps. They blink. Change color too. Got a few new steps too. Slow, still the slow though. I miss you. Baby, you ever gonna come back and dance with me? Can you guess what I dreamed about us? I guess you can. You was out the slam. We didn't even wait for the bus. We ran all the way. It's ready and waiting, sugar. I miss you. Baby, you gonna ever come back and dance with me?
So
I love that.
what we're really honoring here is that love that so many considered shameful and insulting to a city.
It's lifting the shame. It's lifting the shame and working it.
You know, I just have one concern. We're talking about this all as if it's history and it's in the past. But Rikers Island is there. Women's prison, it's almost being made like exotic, you know? But no, no, no. The doors are clanging, and I know from my... So if this knowledge and this remembering stays only in the past, it's not doing all the work it can do. I mean, just, you know, what would it take to go into a women's prison now in New York? What's different now than what before? Maybe they should see this show if they allow it. That's
42% of women in prison today self-identify as LGBTQ. 40% of girls in juvenile detention centers identify as LGBTQ. This is verbally identify during in-detention center interviews. Imagine how much higher the percentage actually is. You're absolutely right. Joan is so right. I think that we cannot think of this only as the past.
No, it's still being arrested today, you know, all across this country, you know, the protesters that are being hauled in, and yeah, something got to be done, you know. But yeah, Rikers Island, it's exactly what it says. It's an island. I only spent one night there, and that's not a nice place either, you know, not really. But Atlantic, the men's prison on Atlantic Avenue, Bedford Hills, Westfield, you know, all of these prisons, you know, where people are just languishing and dying in there, and we need to do more to help.
Let's also attend to the fact that incarceration affects majority Black and brown
Absolutely.
bodies. The statistics in the house of detention are missing for the most part of the 60s, Hugh's telling me, but the 60, 61, 62, Black and brown women are 2 to 1. White women, twice as many.
Believe it.
And we must attend to the ongoing struggles of our communities of color and our queer communities of color with this systems of incarceration and arrest and police.
Right.
And I will say that personally, I went into this work believing strongly in, you know, progressive reform. And I now, having done all of this research, believe that reform is absolutely impossible. Abolition is the only way forward, because any attempt at reform, the prison reverts back to its original form, bigger and with a bigger budget. That is all reform does, because prisons are not actually serving the function we think they serve in this country. It has almost nothing to do with crime. It is taking the place of housing, medical services, psychological services, vocational services. It's taking the place of food, of schools, of hospitals. And because we do not fix those other systems, any reform on prisons will do absolutely nothing, because the system itself overwhelms the reforms. Imagine it like a pipe. If you do not change the pipes on either side, it doesn't matter what you do to that middle part. The gush of water through it will eventually smash right through those walls and make the same shape you had before. There is no such thing as prison reform that will work in this country until we have functioning social safety nets, until we have actual universal health care, until education is a right that everyone has. If there is one thing that people walk away from for my part of this, is just to know prison reform is a lie. Abolition is the only way forward.
Love to you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Just
you.
to paraphrase, I miss you all.
Miss you, Joan. Miss
It's so
you.
good to see you, Joan.
And I can't wait to meet you, Polly and Ariel, in person someday soon.
Yes, please.
Everybody out there in virtual land, thank you. Thank you. Don't forget.
Look, we don't want to leave. We don't want to leave.
I'm not going. I'm waiting here.
Give us the hook.
And just for the folks who are asking, we have been recording this, so everything is going to go up. And Joan and Hugh, I'm going to ask you for the names of some of the things that you've been reading, because we've had some requests for a reading list. So I'm going to try to get all of that together tonight and tomorrow to send out to everyone as a follow-up. So thank you again, all of you, so much. I'm so, so grateful.